The gunfire has stopped. The dust is settling. The only movement in the grass is a tremor from the ragged breathing of a wounded horse. It is June 1876. The 7th Cavalry has just been wiped out at the Little Bighorn by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, who successfully defended their homeland against a massive military sweep. This archaeological map plots exactly where Captain Keogh and his men fell. Amidst this scatter of artifacts and human remains, search parties found the horse, Comanche, standing alone. Trapped in this spot throughout the fight, he now waited in heavy silence, surrounded by the dead. Politicians in Washington would spend decades debating the geopolitical failures of this day. But on the ground, stripped of any national agenda, it was a visceral tragedy of an animal slowly bleeding out. Comanche was in terrible shape. He had taken 7 severe wounds from arrows and bullets. Standard military protocol in a situation like this was clear: save the animal the prolonged suffering and put a bullet in his head. Instead, a soldier walked up, reached out, and pressed a rough, dirt-stained hand against the animal's trembling neck. The men made a quiet choice. They decided if they could coax him to his feet and keep him walking, they wouldn't shoot. They were going to try to keep him alive. Surrounded by a landscape of unidentifiable remains and the grim work of digging mass graves, tending to a survivor was the only mercy the soldiers could find in the dirt. Getting a horse out of the valley was a logistical nightmare. Comanche was bleeding, exhausted, and terrified, and the men leading him 15 miles to the river couldn't explain to him that the danger had finally passed. They eventually reached the Yellowstone River, which the Army had quickly repurposed into a floating field hospital. The lower deck was a chaotic environment of hissing steam engines and shouting crewmen. To keep Comanche calm and prevent his hooves from slipping on the wet wood, the crew cut fresh grass and laid it across the deck. He was led aboard into the dark, surrounded by 52 severely wounded soldiers. These were men who had survived a different part of the battle, traumatized by an ambush they barely escaped. The soldiers spent the grueling journey downriver, desperately asking each other what had happened to Custer's command. The only passenger who had actually stood on that ridge and seen it happen stood completely silent among them. Captain Grant Marsh pushed the Far West downriver night and day, making the run to Bismarck in a record 54 hours. He delivered the news of the massacre to an East Coast that was right in the middle of celebrating the nation's centennial. The public was completely stunned. The military and the press scrambled to regain control of the narrative, flooding newspapers with dramatic illustrations like this to turn a severe tactical failure into a romanticized legend of glory. To anchor that legend, they crowned Comanche the sole survivor of the battle. But look at the actual numbers. Hundreds of 7th Cavalry mounts survived the fight. Native warriors simply captured them and integrated them into their own herds. The nation actively ignored those facts. Americans needed a tangible, living symbol that they could see and touch to absorb their collective shock. They latched onto Comanche because his inability to speak made him a perfect blank canvas. A grieving country could project whatever story of heroism it wanted onto an animal that couldn't correct the record. Comanche slowly recovered from his wounds at Fort Abraham Lincoln. The military issued a formal order stating that to honor his survival, he would never be ridden or put to work again. Instead, he became a living monument. The Army paraded him out for every regimental ceremony, draped in black mourning cloth, forcing him to stand patiently in front of curious crowds and weeping veterans. When we declare an animal a war hero, we have to ask who that honor is actually for. Are we respecting their experience, or are we using them to validate our own? Comanche had no concept of patriotism or duty. Marching him through endless memorials was a way for humans to cope with their losses, using a creature who simply wanted to be left alone in a pasture. He did eventually find some quiet. As the years passed, soldiers took care to brush out his thick winter coat, and he lived a gentle routine anchored by the familiar rattle of oats poured into a wooden manger. He lived to the remarkably old age of 29, outliving many of the soldiers who had carried him off the battlefield. Yet even in death, he couldn't escape his assignment. His remains were stuffed and placed inside a humidity-controlled glass case at the University of Kansas, a rigid curiosity for generations of passing students. It is a sterile, artificial legacy, a museum piece completely disconnected from the raw reality of a terrified animal enduring days of agony in the Montana dirt. Ultimately, the taxidermy is for us. The horse's true legacy is downed in the silence of the valley, a life that endured a war it never understood, long before we turned him into a monument.